So good morning. So my name is Enar Marquez. I am the solution engineering lead for VMware Philippines. Right. So before I speak, I'd like to say thank you to VSTCS for inviting me here. Right. It's sort of a homecoming. I started my career in VSTCS 20 years ago, together with Mao. Unfortunately, right, we're that old. So yeah. So I started there as a network engineer, and then I shifted. Uh, Towards being a system administrator in a service provider environment, and then after that I became a network architect at IBM. Stayed there for quite a long time doing network architecture, operations architecture, right, doing managed services, leading the SE team, and then getting the sales leader role after, right. So I joined VMware 2 years ago, right, and I'm very excited, with this high tech company, doing a lot of things in the innovation front, right? So my presentation will talk about, the high level view of AI and ML, right? I'll talk about what are the business drivers for it, the risks involved, right? The personas that are involved in the organization, because as you know, AI ML typically deals with big organizations, right? And having that kind of a situation would mean you have to understand the personas that you would need to be able to deal with, right? So that there's a clear understanding of how to proceed with the project, right? At the tail end of my project, I'll talk of this presentation. I'll talk about what can VMware help in that area, and of course, I'll talk about some reference clients of ours, right? So this would not be a product presentation. This is going to be more of a business context presentation for us to be able to really get a deeper understanding on how organizations can benefit from AI and ML, right? So can you see my shift of the screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So to be honest, right, AI and ML has a lot of applications in the industry right now, right? As an example, I'll talk about, if you take a look at the left picture, right? There's a lot of drive towards having, drone deliveries, right? Drone deliveries in the US is actually already a thing. It means that you don't really are at the mercy of the postal service, which is of course a legacy system, right? Which has a lot of bureaucracy around it, and just do point-to-point delivery from warehouse going to the house, right? So that kind of a situation really revolves around machines learning routes, right? Machines having a better understanding, of course, of what needs to be done, right? With a mix of the quantitative and qualitative. As you know, right now, data is really about quantitative, but in doing drone deliveries, you should have a context around more of the qualitative side, right? Then AI and ML is being used for managing risk in terms of security, right? I mean physical security. Of course, there are issues around privacy and so on, but at the end of the day, right, if it's within your premises, right, and you are you are aware of the rules, right, it's a big help to be able to really have manage physical security, because you cannot have security guards going around, at all places at all time, right? You would need to have machines help you on that end. Next, on the area of the healthcare industry, right? There are initiatives actually, right? Where you can say, for example, if you have a certain illness, right, it can actually be predicted whether or not you're at risk in that area just based on your risk factors, right?
Enar, sorry to cut
Yes.
you off. I
Yes.
just want to double check. We are still seeing your intro slide.
Okay.
Nasa title slide pa rin tayo.
Okay.
I just want to double check.
Yeah. I shifted it now. Can you see it now?
Okay. No? We're still seeing your title slide, the multidisciplinary perspective on AI.
Okay. Hold on. I don't know what's happening, to be honest, right?
Okay. Can you send us Do we have our product manager in the room?
Yeah, can you see it now?
Yes, yes.
You can see it now, right?
Yes, yes. Okay, so
Okay.
in
So
move
this
na.
is
Yes, perfect. Yes, this is okay now.
there.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
So no
Thank
worries.
you.
Okay. So yeah. So right now, right, with regard to the healthcare industry, right, as I'm coming back, sorry, just to come back to the first part, right. So you see on the left side, right, drone deliveries, right. In the US, it's already a thing with Amazon and so on, and machine learning is actually a very important component of doing that. And then the second part is again, you talk about physical security. Again, machine learning is very important because you cannot be in any place at any time, right? And of course, the use of IoT devices would be a big help for you. Next, on the healthcare industry part, right? There are certain illnesses that can be predicted, right, using AI/ML just by looking at your risk factors, right? And of course, what the doctor can give you is, of course, say, hey, you just avoid this, you avoid that, and it would be better for you. And then finally, of course, the retail side, right? Suggesting, right? Suggesting, say, for example, in a mobile app, is actually a big thing right now, right? And it comes, of course, from machines learning your patterns, machines learning your interests, right? Your biases and so on. Okay. So, in summary, all businesses right now, okay, all businesses right now actually can benefit from AI and ML, right? But definitely there would be challenges and barriers, right? So by challenges, to be honest, most AI projects at this point in time, well, not most, right, but half 50% more 50% encounter issues, right? Um, there are a lot of complexities, to be honest, right, in doing AI and ML projects, right? And then, of course, there are also barriers around security and privacy because, as you know, there's a lot of push right now with regard to data privacy. And if you misuse your data, right, you'll, like in the Philippines, you would have the National Privacy Commission taking care of that, right? In Europe, the big GDPR push, right, would also give you regulatory risk with regard to how you use your data, right? So this challenges and barriers, right, actually make AI and ML a little bit difficult to be able to implement, right? Just because, this is a new technology and the guardrails, right, are not really well defined. So you have to be very careful with that. At the same time, on the other hand, right, the business context, right, is actually not clearly defined, right? So therefore, you have to have a better business context on how and why you really want to have this AI ML project put into place so that it helps your business. Okay, so basically that's what this slide says. So why do business really struggle? Okay, you can see on the middle there's really a big firewall, right? So the big firewall, it means that, there on the one side there are data scientists, and on the other side there are IT operators, right? Data scientists, of course, are scientists, as you know, very creative, right? They are, iterate quickly, right? Agile methodology and so on. The need for experimentation that's quick is there, right? The need to be able to scale quick after you get it right, from the experimentation phase is there. That's the pressure, right? And then if you're dealing with traditional IT systems, then you have, the ticket-based system, right? I'm not saying that ticket-based system is bad, right? It's just that on this side of the business, AIML, a certain amount of freedom, right, to be able to quickly experiment, right, quickly install, tear down, right, scale, right, is there so that it really helps the organization with their business need. Okay. Now, on the other side of the fence, right, is actually the IT operator, right? The IT operator would suffer from, first of all, right, a finite amount of resources. Right? It's not their fault, right? There's certain amount of infrastructure there, right? Even if you go to cloud, right, you still have those limitations. Secondly, right, there are many silos even in the IT operations space, right? So depends on the technology that you use, right? In fact, there are organizations that would have, Windows-based systems, Linux-based systems, right? Unix-based systems. So that's another limitation that they have, right? And then finally, there's an issue also, right, with regard to resiliency with regard to AI applications, because for you to be able to figure out the enterprise resiliency model, you typically would need to understand what the application is. And if the IT operator would be, dealing with AI ML and not familiar with that pretty much, right? They don't know what is the right resiliency strategy to be able to put into place, right? So that's really a big struggle, right? With businesses right now. For the deployment, right? The challenges are actually, there's risk, performance, and scale, right? It will always come back to risk, performance, and scale, right? Um, so for risk, right, there's an integration risk. It means that, in any project that you have, right? Say, for example, you just run, a simple uh, and PC deployment project. Okay, let's do it like that. I'll put in this analogy. In a simple PC deployment project, you would need to organize your people to say, hey, the IT manager should understand what needs to be provisioned, what's the security provision required for desktop deployment. Your people in the desktop deployment should be there on time, right? And should not be, if you have multiple sites, it should be controlled, right? What's the site that's going to deploy first, second, and third, right? So basically that integration, right? That project integration is actually a very big risk, right? In terms of AI ML, okay? Second is, how do you integrate your AI ML infrastructure, right? With existing infrastructure, right? Again, there's a lot of things that needs to be done on that end. Security has to be vetted, network has to be vetted, and so on and so forth, okay? Now, assuming you get through that, right? Okay, the AI system is already in place, right? Then what happens is, as you move towards your goal, right, the performance can be a challenge. Okay, by performance, right, it means two things. Okay, first of all, is the raw compute power, right? So if you don't have the raw compute power, or you misestimate it, right, then you will set back the project, right? And it depends, again, it's the setback is dependent on the amount of time that you can do procurement. Okay, assuming you're doing on premises, right? Even on cloud, right? If it's a specialist AI ML workload, then it also would take time for you to be able to deploy. Next, from a performance perspective, right, that time to train models is also very important, because that is where you put in the optimal the optimal performance, right? Optimal performance means that the scope is just right, for the scale. Okay, so if you have that kind of a situation, then again, it becomes a skills challenge, right? Or even a skill challenge. Say, for example, if you have just one person doing AI ML, then it would take time. If you have multiple people doing that, then it would be better. But then again, can you get the skills, right? It's going to be a recurring theme in this discussion on where we need to get the skills. Okay. Now, assuming you've already done that, the performance is just right, you have the right scale, right? You have the proper context with regard to the trained models, then the next challenge goes to scale. Okay, how do you quickly scale out, right? Again, if you have a limited amount of resources, the time for procurement is again an issue. If you have a hybrid cloud model where you can scale out, right, network can be a challenge, right? Or say, for example, the balance between the on-premise and the scale out, right, can be a challenge, especially in the Philippines right now, right? If you use a hyperscaler cloud, you have 50 milliseconds latency, automatic, right? So the scale out is not as straightforward, right? Even though you have a hybrid cloud model, it's not going to be very as straightforward as that, right? And then from a scale perspective, right, how would you manage, right, availability and manageability, right? Yes, it can scale out, but can you manage it, right? Will it be highly available, right? So again, it's another issue, right? So what is really needed for rapid AI and ML? Okay. The first thing that really you need to have is, you have to be disciplined with regard to planning. Okay? By planning, it means that you have to know what your scope is. You have to know what the scale your target is, right? You have to be able to predict, right, how big the scale can go once you're successful with your modeling. Okay. Now, that's the first piece. That's the planning piece. The second piece is the process piece. In AI and ML, right, you have two methods, right? You do it within the database. Yes, that can be done. But the more, the more available, what's really happening right now, it's really more of the traditional model wherein you have a process of, I'll get the data, I'll put the data in my sandbox, I'll do the modeling in the sandbox. After I do that, I'll bring it back to production, I'll try to use it to scale. If it doesn't scale, I'll come back because I have to tune it again, right? And so on and so forth. So back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That's not really fun, okay? It takes a lot of time. And by taking a lot of time, it's not the time of the data scientist, but it's more of, time to value, okay? So that is, an issue that we need to talk about, right? So coming back, what is the best approach, right? You have to train the model within the database, right? Get that scope in within the database. Remove the process, right? You have to remove the process for it. It has to be straightforward in that end. So you just focus on, the training part, right? Then you save the model as a pre-computed object within the database itself, right? Okay. And then after that, right, you deploy and evaluate, right? Again, still within the database. So that's the context that we think makes sense. Okay. So really, if you are a leader in the organization, what can AI, ML, and data science do for you? Okay. So as a line of business leader, okay, how do I define a line of business leader, right? So these are the people who are responsible for the business in the organization. So I can say these are the CEO, CFO, right? CMO, CRO, the Chief Revenue Officer, right? You can also say it's the Chief Operations Officer, the Chief HR Officer, right? And even the Chief Technology Officer and the Chief Information Officer, right? So these line of business leaders are the people, right, who have, a lot of stake in the business, and they are managed by objective. Okay, by managed by objective, it means that, these people are the ones who make the decision, can invest, okay, but are not limited typically by budget. Okay. So the first imperative for them is, of course, to drive business growth, right? You have to drive business growth. And by driving business growth, it means, like, say, for example, from a CEO perspective, it means that they should be able to harness the data that they have to see how past projects succeed and fail, what's the profitability, right? And then from there, right, proceed, right, on whether or not this project can make sense for them, okay? Same with the CFO. The CFO will focus on cash, right? Free cash. How to make use of free cash, right? How to manage risk based on that, okay? So that analytics on the financial side of the business, right, will also benefit him, right? Then, of course, the Chief Risk Officer is also very important here because you cannot drive business growth without sustainability. And a lot of risk items can also be had by just understanding what data you have, okay? What are the points that you have to be able to take a look at, right, even in terms of metrics, and then from there deal with it proactively without you being exposed, right, in your organization. Next, the problems of startup, right? As you know, right now there's a battle between traditional business and startup business, right? Traditional business would have, a lot of legacy infrastructure. They have a lot of spend, right? Because they have built up a lot of organizational power, right, on that end. But at the same time, right, they're not that flexible, right? They have, legacy processes. They have technical debt. So those are issues that are very important. Now, Startups don't have that. They're very flexible, right? They're starting from scratch, right? They don't have any legacy systems. They're very they're very, agile and so on. But at the same time, legacy organizations, right? Established organizations would have a lot of data, right? And so that data can be harnessed, right? To be able to understand how to target your clients, your individual clients, right? That the startups are blind in the first place, right? Because they don't have that amount of data. And finally, if you're on the CXO level, it's still imperative to reduce cost, right? As an example, if you're a chief procurement officer, right, you have to have the right price at any time of procurement, right? And your previous data on procurement can definitely be harnessed to have that. And also, you can predict, right, what's the typical increase in prices, right? Like say, for example, right now, of course, there's a lot of inflation. That is something that can be used with the CPO, right? Especially in the areas wherein you're in manufacturing, you're getting raw materials, a small amount, right, of savings, say, for example, in grain, can mean, billions of pesos, right? So that's a big example of reducing cost, right? From a CPO perspective. Next, we come down, right? So below the C-level executives is the IT operations lead. Okay, the IT operations lead would not be managed by objective. They're typically going to be managed by budget, right? But at the same time, these people like the IT manager, the VP for infra, VP for apps, right? The people really on the middle management and going to the ground, right? Even the enterprise architect, right, would have issues around number one, a finite amount of resources, and that's very difficult. Believe me, I came from that, right? I was an IT manager before. Next, the other side of it is, there's also much pressure here to be able to bring the right skills, right? With a finite amount of resources, okay? And as you know, right now, the skills are not, very available. They're not really very available. The market now is very tight with regard to skills. So we have to be able to figure it out, right? So how do you do it? First of all, you have to use technology, right? By having better visibility across the IT estate. Okay? It means that there's an integrated view, right? With regard to what you have, the manual processes should be eliminated by having just this visibility, right? So that you can react quicker, right, to many issues. And of course, again, to be able to streamline the view of your limited IT team. Next, you have to improve capacity planning. Okay, and therefore with that having better cost efficiency. This is a very big issue, right? In that area, in the IT operations leader area, right? The cost of, the speed of doing business in IT typically revolves around procurement, right? Because you're limited by the resources that you have. And the procurement process can typically take 3 to 6 months with regard to IT, especially now, a lot of shortage, right, with regard to hardware. Of course, that software is not a very big issue on that end, but hardware has a lot of limitations, chip shortage, and so on, right? So you have to be able to be intelligent enough, right, and use AI/ML to predict where you're going, right? Having multiple inputs, right, from your enterprise architect, getting, what's the data what's the project in the pipeline, what's the projection based on that, right? On the current IT operation side, right, how is data increasing in terms of the capacity, the compute, right? Even the resources, the IT resources that you have, right? You should be able to have a predictable model, right, on how you're going to grow in 1 year, 3-year time, so that you can do advanced provisioning and use that data, right, to be able to justify to procurement to buy ahead. That's very important. That's very crucial. And then finally, you have to enhance your security posture and ensure compliance, right? Here in this area, the major thing that we have with regard to enhance security posture and ensure compliance, is really about multiple tools that are not integrated, right? And at the same time, there are many, say for example, from a ransomware perspective, from a MITRE attack perspective, there are many things going on in the organization that, AI/ML can really help monitor and understand where is it going. And if you see that it's going towards having this kind of a risk with regard to ransomware or anything, it can be easily flagged up and say, hey, this is an issue. And, this issue can then be forwarded to your security operations team to be able to be verified. Again, it's a two-step process, right? Take a look at it from a machine perspective, and then from there, verify qualitatively by the security operations person. So, how can VMware help, right? First of all, right, I'll talk about what is VMware Vision. So again, from a high level, right? If you take a look at any digital transformation initiative, not only data science or anything, right? But in any digital transformation initiative, right? The challenge of organizations is to be able to, do that, right? Across multiple platforms, across multiple applications, and across multiple devices, right? With a certain amount of maturity, right? Of course, not all would have very mature infrastructure organization, right? But working through it, right, in various amounts of maturity is very important, right? So what VMware can offer is, to be able to help organizations, right, do that digital transformation, right, in any platform that they seem would benefit them, whether it's going to be private cloud, sovereign cloud, public cloud, right? Whether it's really on a Kubernetes application, right? Going to modern application, in a traditional monolithic environment, just because, it's very difficult to migrate, or even just consume via SaaS, right? And finally, right, in any transformation, especially so in AI/ML, right, the input of your devices from the field, right, we call it the edge, right, is actually very important. That is actually where the raw material, which is data, comes from, right? So from there, right, you gather it, and you'll be able to integrate it in any application and cloud, right? That is how VMware envisions helping organizations move towards the future. Now, in more detail, right, remember my earlier slide about the gap, the firewall, right, between the data scientist and the IT administrator, right? This is how VMware looks at how, bridging that gap, right? So in the middle, instead of a firewall, right, you have the VMware stack, right? Wherein you have the NVIDIA stack integrated with VMware stack, right? To be able to marry, right, the AI/ML stack together with traditional application. Okay? So our VMware vSphere with Tanzu, okay, actually supports having, a traditional CPU environment integrated with a GPU environment. Okay, excuse me. GPU environment. As you know, a lot of the things going on in the AI/ML space in the graphical processing unit, right? Especially because, you need to have the quick processing involved, right? So the thing with that is, if you integrate that with VMware vSphere with Tanzu, you can actually do GPU computing, right? Whether it's going to be on a traditional VM level or even on a container-based, Kubernetes environment, right? So if you take a look at the lower stack, you can actually also see that even on the edge, right, you can actually use an NVIDIA SmartNIC to integrate with the vSphere, right, so that the manageability can be straightforward, and it's on the plane where the IT manager, IT admin is used to doing, but at the same time, the flexibility that's required by the data scientist, the scale that's required by the data scientist is available in the organization. Okay, so that is the AI-ready enterprise platform of VMware together with NVIDIA. Then Greenplum, right? Later on, we will have a deeper dive into Greenplum, right? So it's going to be available later part of the day, right? But on a higher level, right, the mindset of Greenplum is, to do complex AI/ML work, right, within the database itself, right, within the Greenplum data warehouse. Okay, it means that you gather all data that you have. Say, for example, if you have text, geospatial, and graph, right, it's just going to be done in just one database. Okay, in the green plum stack, right? And from there, you can distill your models, right, quickly without the process that I described earlier of, going to sandbox and so on. And then from there, put it quickly to production and then put it quickly to scale, right? So next, if you go towards, the IT operation side, right? VMware also has this self-driving operations with vRealize. So what does it do, right? It means that, optimization, management, remediation, compliance typically done by people, right? But there are tasks there, right, that can be automated. So say, for example, in terms of performance optimization, right, in vRealize, you can take a look at what the patterns of the organization is, right, and have, the machine just do the performance optimization by itself, right, based on how you use it. Because, you don't really change applications overnight, right? So since you already know the pattern of that application, then you can do the performance optimization based on that pattern, right? Same with capacity management, right? Of course, in capacity management, this is really, take a look at it from a predictive perspective, to look ahead on it, right? So that's also a very important thing that we can do, right? So basically, the context is to run the infrastructure just like a public cloud, okay? Next, you remediate the minion remediation by itself. That can be done, right? And leave the other, complex remediation to be done by your IT operators, right? And then, of course, the integrated compliance piece, right? It means that you see problems early, right? Then you remediate early, right? And so therefore, having kind of a visibility will help you drive, better operations by using, machine on one end, but at the same time, your very streamlined IT team, right, can focus on the most important items, okay? And then dovetail that towards having, VMware Skyline, which is, the software support side. In this example, what can happen is, with your self-driving operations, you can actually connect it with Skyline. It means that you can easily send the logs automatically to Skyline for them to be able to analyze, right, and proactively resolve issues that you have in the organization, right, in your IT stack. So I move on, right, to a reference client. I think this is a very important part, right? There is no more complicated AI ML use case than weather. I will tell you that, right? Why? Because weather is so complex, right? As you know, say for example, I live in Marikina, right? There are times it's raining here, but in Quezon City, it's like sunny. Okay. And it's because, the reality is there's no really, macro weather, but really micro weather. The only macro weather that you can have would be a big typhoon, definitely, right? But all things happen micro, right? Now, in weather prediction, there's a lot of input, right? What do I mean, right? There's a lot of input with regard to sensors. Example, in the Marikina River Valley, you see in the river, there's a sensor for, the water flow, right? You integrate that. Then, of course, you integrate also, right, social data. What does that mean? It means that the people affected, right, are being monitored, right? How many people are in this barangay or barrio and so on, right? Same with this Government of Japan public safety issue, right? Now, apart from that, you will also see inputs from weather predicting agencies. That's very important, right? Because that is really a complex thing also that needs to be inputted into this kind of a system. And then, if, say for example, right, you have this localized torrential rain risk management, what happens is you integrate everything and anything, and you have to give inputs to local government officials on really when do we evacuate? What are the paths we can use for evacuation, right? How long would be the evacuation so that you can provision the food that's there, right? So those complications, right, are really, a very good use case with regard to AI ML, right? So moving forward, there's a different use case, a banking use case, right? So in the banking sector, right, you have Morgan Stanley, wherein they use Green Plum, right, to be able to do capital allocation, risk management, wealth management, right? Government reporting, liquidity analysis, and compliance, right? So a lot of those use cases, right, are very important to this bank, right? Morgan Stanley, is an investment bank, huge investment bank, has a lot of exposure with regard to risk in a very regulated industry, right? They should be able to manage that, okay? And they use Green Plum, right, to be able to have that, right? And they're saying from a quote, right, without Green Plum, it's very difficult to have, the complex regulatory reporting requirements, right? And there's of course a testimonial that Green Plum really has the superior query performance that can give you better context in a short amount of time. Okay, so with that, right, I end my presentation by a call to action. So to be honest, right, if you have any interest with regard to this AI/ML application, say for example, if you talk about integration of GPU, right, to vSphere, or even data warehousing via Green Plum, right, or even having self-driving operations via vRealize, do reach out to your VST/ECS contacts, right, and even your VMware contacts if you have them, so that we can talk in more detail about it, right? And for any learnings, the same, right? So if you want to have any specialist sessions with regard to these topics, right, then please request to the VST/ECS folks. Later on in the day, we would have a Green Plum session, right? So that Green Plum session would deep dive on the product itself, right, and can give you a better context with regard to how to really use the technology, right, from a deeper technical perspective, right? Okay. With that, I thank you, and I wish you a good day ahead and happy Tech Summit for the rest of the session.